we're talking about this today because there's a high co-occurrence, of OCD and autism. It's like a lot of other mental health problems. OCD is more common with autistic people.
Actually, a person could be autistic and be experiencing OCD distress. Yeah. Most autistic adults now didn't know as children that they were autistic. We're finding out in adulthood, aren't we? So if you're also OCD or have always been autistic and you've thought it was OCD, it's hard for people, isn't it?
Yeah, it's hard to figure it all out. And so that's why we're here to try to tease them out in ways that it might be helpful and which we also like doing. Great.
Yes, so.
Yeah, so
we spoke, didn't we, about some anxiety topics already. We've spoken about, PTSD as it relates to being neurodivergent or being autistic. We spoke about anxiety in a general sense. I think I called it like the lifetime companion to get used to, in a way. And we spoke about social anxiety a lot. And so we thought today, didn't we, we'd talk about obsessing and compulsing, if you like, as an anxiety, as a category of anxiety, put it that way.
Yeah. And, I think one of the most important starting points is, in fact, just for us to clarify that certainly when it takes the form of OCD, Obsessive Compulsive Disorder, it is an anxiety problem, because I think, and this is, we're talking about this today because there's a high co-occurrence, of OCD and autism. It's like a lot of other mental health problems. OCD is more common with autistic people. But, there's also sort of confusion between them and confusion of what's meant by OCD and confusing which bits of this person's experience are the autistic bits and the OCD bits. And, I think that's a really important territory. And as I said, in a way, I think the most useful starting point is to say that, the sort of the things you find in OCD that you also find elsewhere in life, like being obsessed with things, people can be obsessed with a particular football team, or being compulsive about something, because maybe you're addicted to it, or you're just, it means a lot to you, or having rituals, which again is something that, we find a good bit in autistic people, but is it OCD, is it not? And, that sort of passion that can seem again like obsession or compulsion, that you find around what's sometimes called special interests or passionate interests. I think the key point is that a lot of those things don't always have anxiety with them. And they need, for it to be OCD, it needs to be about threat and anxiety. So it needs to be about a danger that you're trying to ward off in some way through your thoughts or your rituals or your compulsive behaviors. And again, for me, that's often where I like to start, because I think even apart from the confusion between OCD and autistic traits and autistic behaviors and autistic styles of thinking, I also think that the popular notion of OCD is just very vague. It's like, you're very OCD. You always like to leave your desk tidy at the end of the day, Sure, I am a bit OCD, but that's actually more autistic than OCD. And unless you're leaving your desk tidy because you believe that something terrible could happen if you don't, this kind of magical thinking, like, somebody could die if I don't leave everything lined up. If you just really like leaving your desk tidy, it simply isn't OCD. It's a misuse of the term. So for me, that's a useful clarification, I think, for the start,
Definitely, yeah, because with autistic people, I think that is a good comparison, isn't it? Because it's very distressing, when people talk about OCD or having OCD, or it is an anxiety. It is very distressing. It's very disruptive. People feel bad about it, don't they? It's upsetting. It's draining. It's exhausting. It's something that the person feels like that they wish that this wasn't going on
Exactly.
Although, whereas autistic people, we don't feel like that. We like having order, and it's soothing. It can help regulate. It can be comforting, to have, things in order, or repetitive patterns of things, or to do things associated with certain rules or something, some kind of order and structure about things. It's not distressing. It's the opposite of distressing. We do those things when we get a chance to do those things, ideally,
Exactly. And I think the way you were describing OCD there really, rings true for me. It's like it's something we don't want, even though we want to do the behaviors. It's like an addiction, we want to do it, of course, or we'd stop, but also it's like it has a hold of us. Like
Yeah.
OCD feels like it's something that has a hold of you.
Yeah, that's it, isn't it?
You really want to do. Yeah.
Yeah, I know.
You're in
Yeah.
conflict with it. You fight against it. You think, oh, I don't want to think this stuff, or I don't want to wash my hands again, but I feel I have to, or I don't want to be lining everything up, but I'm afraid if I don't, something terrible will happen. And so the feel of the one is very different from the other. Now, again, they can occur in the one person, and there's a reasonably high level of that in the autistic population. But still, getting clear just what they are and what they aren't, I think is really, really a good start and very helpful for a lot of people. Yeah.
Yeah. So to be clear, you're saying actually it doesn't mean that any one person has to be one or the other, but actually a person could be autistic and be experiencing OCD distress. Yeah.
No, the prevalence is higher, like a lot of things, and we've talked about, as you mentioned, other things like social anxiety, and but it's true of so many things, as we know, eating disorders and depression and all sorts of mental health problems are more common in the neurodivergent communities, more common in the autistic community, more common in the ADHD community, and obviously the ADHD community. Yeah, and OCD is one example. It's I think I can't remember the numbers now. I don't know if you have them to hand, but like maybe 4 times as common or something like that according to recent statistics, something along those lines. I think.
Right.
Yeah. So, it's significant. It's significant enough. Now that does lead to an interesting question that I don't think anybody has a definite answer to, at least yet, and that is, why is that? I mean, in a way, the links between something like depression having a higher prevalence, how that might link to being neurodivergent is perhaps some of that link might be reasonably easy to make, in the sense, well, why would masked even to themselves, masked neurodivergent people, autistic people, not be depressed, like in a way, the link isn't hard to make. Is there some particular reason why OCD is more common? And could it have anything to do with the fact that there's a kind of a parallel, if you like, with around things like order and rules and stuff like that, even though the nature of them in autism itself, in being autistic, is different from their nature in OCD itself? Is there some reason why it's more common, or is it again just that anxiety is just so common that it makes autistic bit more vulnerable to developing a disorder, an anxiety disorder of some kind? So I don't think anybody has any definite, solid, very evidence-based theories on that just yet, but that I know of. But it is common. So.
More research to be done in that area then.
There is, yeah. That's being done, I think. Yeah, it's just not a bit like with eating disorders, which I don't think we've talked about yet. So that's an interesting one where the prevalence is higher in the autistic population, and indeed autism, being autistic, is more prevalent in the eating disordered population than people diagnosed with an eating disorder. And again, some theories would suggest that there's some psychological overlap, apart from any other causality. So there might be something a bit like that with OCD, but still, they're different things. Autistic rules, as you said, and structure, love of structure, and fixation and obsession and all those sort of words, which can be neutral or can carry a very negative weight. What they mean for the autistic part of somebody is different from what they mean from the OCD experience of those things. Definitely. Yeah.
So we're back to not judging on observable behaviors again, aren't we?
That's really important.
Yeah.
That's a crucial part of it. Yeah. Crucial part of it.
And the other thing that occurs to me as well is, of course, you're born autistic. And you will always be autistic. And yet with OCD, a person can develop that at any age, as I understand it.
That's right. Yeah.
And I've known people, or certainly one person I'm thinking of, who has thought and had a like formal diagnosis, if you like, of being OCD, and has thought all of their adult life, or for a lot of their adult life, I have OCD, and actually realised very late in life that they are autistic, but of course didn't know, and took that as the explanation. So even though we are born autistic, you might not know, and you might have got those different frameworks, so it's not, it's like, how do you differentiate that? How do you then say, okay, have I always been like this? Well, in some ways I've always been, but when did it start to cause distress? You start to get into it a bit, don't you, when you're looking at it like that? Because of course, as you've said before, most autistic adults now, certainly in the global north, didn't know as children that they were autistic. We're finding out in adulthood, aren't we? So if you're also OCD, or have always been autistic, and you've thought it was OCD, it's hard for people, isn't it?
Yeah, it's hard to figure it all out. And I do think that is another important point just to emphasize, because, we all love when things are clearer and simpler, but they often just aren't, So I do think this is, it just is complicated, some of it. And so that's why we're here talking about things, I suppose, just trying to tease them out in ways that it might be helpful, and which we also like doing, because we like teasing things out and clarifying things, to clarify things in our heads. But, another absolutely vital point, I think, that follows on from what you're saying, well, we're born autistic, if we're autistic, or we're autistic when we're born, we're already autistic, whereas, people develop, anxiety problem disorders like obsessive compulsive disorder at some point in their life. That pattern starts and it grows. But also, most people would like to largely recover from OCD. If not entirely, they would like to largely recover. And I'm not saying that nobody feels that way about being autistic, particularly when we first discover it and look back in our history, lots of people certainly have that ambivalence around it. And some people hang on, that goes on, they continue to feel some ambivalent about it. Like, in some ways, God, would I be happier if someone could cure me, change me into not autistic, But by and large, most people nowadays don't feel that way about it. Most adults who discover it, they read about it, they learn about it, they watch videos, they get involved a bit more in what's going on within the autistic community discussions and the neurodiversity paradigm, and they begin to feel, no, this is just who I am. It's my identity, and I'm starting to embrace it, and I'm starting to make use of it, and I'm starting to unmask and so on. Whereas OCD is, it's just I was going to use a curse word there, but I won't, but just it's a very, very nasty, debilitating horror, really, and it can be quite progressive, and it gets worse and worse and worse, and it becomes such a horror. And of course, we want to help people recover from that largely as much as possible, and that's not the way as therapists that we approach autism, being autistic either. We approach being autistic as something to explore and learn about, whereas we approach OCD as something that I'll try and help you to recover insofar as possible from.
For pain relief, for freedom, from it. Yeah, I know, because as you say, you're sort of, the person is trapped in it, and doesn't like it, and it has a lot of it's restrictive, isn't it? It's actually restricting you from being yourself, whereas actually being autistic, how they say you don't grow out of autism, you grow into it. When you come into therapy, you learn more about yourself. Whereas with OCD, you don't want to be growing into it more, because it's taking more and more away from who you're connecting with yourself, actually, and your real self and your real feelings, because feelings are another thing, aren't they? As I was understanding OCD, from like a humanistic or a psychoanalytic kind of framework, which is different to the CBT way of framing things. Potentially depends what kind of therapist you are, which we're not just the model of therapy, are we?
Partially different anyway,
yeah. It can seem to serve like that the person may have difficulty, or it's conveniently preventing knowing what one feels, especially like aggression or anger. Those kinds of things can be not too scary, maybe too threatening, perhaps. And that the thoughts are intrusive, you see, aren't they? The thoughts and images and urges are intrusive. They're not chosen, and they'll come in, if you like, into mind in place of to shield oneself from knowing what the threatening things are, the feelings or experiences or consequences of things, or when there's a lot of uncertainty, that kind of thing.
It's an interesting.
What's your take on that?
Well, it's an interesting thing they say about intrusive thoughts in the world of OCD, and that is that, if you really stop and think about it, and certainly if you try some mindfulness meditation, anybody now tries mindfulness meditation of any kind, what we discover is all thoughts are intrusive if you mean unplanned. If you mean unwanted, then the OCD ones are intrusive, but all thoughts arise. None of them are chosen. You can't choose to think something, because if you'd already thought it then before you think it, so all thoughts simply arise.
That's a really interesting word, because that's a very interesting point, Eoin, because actually they're not intrusive. You're right. They're not, are they? And that's actually preventing someone who's experiencing obsessiveness and compulsiveness, if you like. That's sort of putting it outside the self again, like this is intruding on me, when actually what's happening is the intrusion is about one's own brain attending to it repeatedly, actually. So it's not intrusive. It's like some kind of compulsion to keep attending to the thoughts and images. Your sort of brain keeps going back there,
That's it. Yeah. And that view is parallel to part of the CBT view, which is that the problem arises not when these thoughts arise, but when we react to them in a certain way, a certain resistance, a certain I shouldn't be thinking that, and try and push away the thought. And then every time we have that thought, we try and push it away, which means we start watching for it, which means that actually we have it more, which means that, and so the obsessive side, the obsessive loops around OCD come from, unwanted and resistance to thoughts rather than simple acceptance of thoughts, and particularly interpreting thoughts as dangerous, as in, maybe that means I do that, or maybe thinking that will make it happen, magical thinking and all of that. So that's one key part. And also I think, what would be agreed pretty much, I think, in all the theories would be, going back to what you were saying, that it's compensatory for something, just like addictions are compensatory for something. It's compensatory in some way, what exactly, are in different cases, but it is, it's just, there's always more below it, there's always more behind it.
I mean, I know people are trying to survive, aren't they? So that's your own brain trying to make you survive if things are really threatening or confusing or something, bodily experiences, feelings. I know. And you were saying a moment ago, what did you just say a minute ago about? I forgot.
Well, I was saying, the two things. One is that, is the notion of responding with attempting to control and banish thoughts is where it starts. That's where the problem starts. Yeah,
I know, because when you were talking about how the repeatedness, if you like, we were talking about the brain keeping attending to the thoughts. Well, that's really isn't that a feature of all anxiety in a way? It's like, that's why it plays on your mind. That's why it causes the physiological symptoms. It just won't go away. It's just there, is a looming, maybe growing concern or fear. But like you say, with obsessive compulsiveness, it's not just that. It's also the conclusions that you make, the meanings that you attribute to those things. Like, you said a bit about magical thinking, didn't you?
Absolutely. Yeah. No, 100% the meanings. And the meanings are, well, this is threatening in some way, and it can be anything from, what if I have, germs on my hands and they somehow get into my system and I get sick. And that can lead, of course, then to the compulsive behaviors, like I better wash my hands again, even though I've just washed them. But also, oh, I just thought, gosh, what if, somebody in my life, died? Does that mean now that I thought that somehow that could happen? Things like that. It's like connections that are made that, and that interpret certain, things marked as danger or wrong to think or dangerous to think, or leading to some, behavior that has to be done to neutralize those thoughts, or just rituals in your head to neutralize the thoughts. And of course, this is the bit where, things like rituals and repetitive thinking, this is where we need to come back to being autistic in a few minutes and just, again, distinguish the difference there. But you see, this is all about anxiety and fear and, in a sense, control,
Well, I was thinking
if anybody had complete control, like if you were a god, then you wouldn't be anxious. Because if you didn't like something, you would just change it. You know what I mean? So anyone had complete control of their thoughts and complete control of other people and complete control of the physical environment. They'd never be anxious, And in a way, that's what's happening in an anxiety disorder, is that, the kind of balance that somebody who has, if you like, reasonably healthy anxiety in their life, the balance between sort of what I can control and what I can't is working reasonably well. In an anxiety disorder, that's gone way out of control, and they're trying too hard to control stuff that just can't be controlled,
That's what I was going to ask you. I wondered whether the difference was that the reason it gets out of hand, is that the person worries about not being able to control it. So like contamination fears, for example, it's like, oh, I'm not going to be able to stop it, and so then you say the compensatory aspect, it's all compensatory. So maybe the person is thinking, well, here's some things that I can do that will put some control on it. It's sort of a misguided attempt to overcome that sense of lack of impact on preventing.
My understanding is that's a lot of the way in which it's often seen by various approaches, but certainly what I'm familiar with. And it reminds me that some of the kind of approach I'm familiar with, which is, CBT based, but that doesn't mean that it's just about breaking the vicious cycle, though it is about that. It is also about, but what are the underlying vulnerabilities that would have led to this? And, some of the underlying vulnerabilities are often things like perfectionism, over responsibility, and, difficulty with uncertainty. And only now that I'm saying those out loud, I realize, well, they're often more common in adult autistic. Now how much they're more common because they're autistic and how much they're more common because we grew up not knowing we were autistic, and that was very confusing. But those things are more common than average in adult autistics, and therefore maybe that's one of the reasons why OCD is more common. So I suppose that's maybe part of where some of the research and clinical kind of looking needs to go.
I suppose, taking having responsibility is anxiety producing for any adult. It's blissful when we're children. If you've got you don't have to take responsibility, which we hope that's what children will experience. And then you get to a point where it starts to be, you have to start to do stuff. You have to take responsibility, and there are risks and consequences. Making mistakes and errors and not being able to do it. It's frightening for everybody. Most people try not to think about it too much, or they've got their own ways of coping and supports. But I guess the difference maybe then with someone who becomes more veering into obsessive compulsive experiences is that the responsibility for harming others or causing harm has got out of control. Like they are so worried about causing disaster or harm that becomes really, really scary and overwhelming, and that's something that just can't be tolerated. The thought of that can't be tolerated.
Yeah. And you know, the horror of it when it develops over years is that, you know, uh, the attempt, that attempt to, you know, ease their own anxiety and, you know, gain more of a sense of control has the opposite effect. You know, it actually means
Mm.
that they more and more live in a hyper vigilant, terrified, desperately trying to even hold things together at all type of world. You know,
Yeah.
that's the tragedy, I think, of OCD, because then, yeah, they create, not deliberately, but the process creates more and more of itself, you know. You know, and more things become within the circle of things I have to try and control, and it gets more and more desperate and more just hyper vigilant all the time. You know, it's horrible. Yeah.
And yet some people aren't aware of that, are they? They sort of might know in the background, but as I understand it, it's not something that you consciously choose, of course. And you might not even feel that. You might not even feel that that's what's going on for you. You just know you're doing the behaviors, or you feel compelled to do something, or that there's an urge to attend to certain things.
Well, part of the problem often for people is that it is often progressive, which means it starts small and
Yeah.
grows. And if you could catch it when it's small, it'd be great, because it'd be easier to deal with. But like addictions, most people aren't motivated to catch those things when they're small. And not only that, they often don't see them as a problem when they're small. So it's like when somebody starts out with a slightly more than average, you know, fear around germs on their hands. Well, they often just think, look, I'm just a bit more, you know, fussy than some people are. Even I'm right, actually, and you're all wrong. You should be more careful. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so they don't see it as actually maybe you're kind of going on that path. And why would they? You know, how would we magically know that? And yet, yeah, looking back then a few years later, it becomes clear that in a way that was the beginning of that track. You know,
Right. Yeah.
so. There's no easy solution to that except greater awareness, I think, which is what we're about. You know, a lot of the time it's just, yeah, the more awareness we can raise around these things, more likely people are to hear something useful about them and catch them earlier or point them out to somebody else. So again, it's sometimes hard for people to hear these things, you know, and they get defensive, and as people do when they're anxious, you know. So it's complex territory, you know, I think from a therapy, from a clinical point of view, if you use that word, you know. But like I think that it's, yeah, and like we're not trying to today to give a lesson in working with it, though maybe we might come back to a little bit more some of that at some stage. But I think maybe this stage my mind is going back a little bit again to the contrast to the, you know, we're talking about OCD, but we're also talking about it in the context of autistic people. And so my mind is going back a bit now to the, hold on, let's just rebalance it again and maybe say a little bit about, you know, so we are also saying that while all of that exists and is very real and very important to know about and very important to help people with, and is at a higher prevalence rate in the autistic community, also, there's a whole lot of stuff that goes on for autistic people, which we mentioned earlier on, but it'd be good to come back to, I think, which often is called obsession and ritual and even think, huh?
Yeah, yes, no, I agree. That's a
And
really
even
good
things,
point.
and even fixation, words like that, you know, and yet it more comes into the territory of you know, passionate interest, which is often called obsessive interest, and like autistic people themselves will often say, yeah, I'm really obsessed with that, but that doesn't mean it's obsessed in that sense of OCD obsessed. It just means, yeah, I tend to get more hyper focused and I get great pleasure out of it. And that doesn't mean there's no problems. It could be you're neglecting something else because you get so down the rabbit hole, you know, but it's obsession in a different sense.
It's different to obsessing as a cover, is a deflection, isn't it? Yeah.
It's so it has its own value. It's not a compensation for something. It's a genuine engagement, which if you have the time for it, it'll be very rewarding and very meaningful and very productive and give a great sense of mastery and maybe grow your self-esteem and maybe be an avenue for making friends. But it does tend to be more a bit more fixated, hyper-focused, obsessive in autistic people. But that just is a different sense of the word, I think, and a very different experience. And also the bit that you were talking a bit more about earlier, I think is really important to come back to. It's like also, yes, in what we call autistic, there is often a lot of need for and love of structure, order, repetition, ritual, routine, pattern, rules, but again, unless that is, this has to be done in case something terrible happens, as you say, harm, it's not under the category of OCD. It's, again, some of it can be seen as obsessive, either by the person themselves or other people. Yes, I am obsessed with getting my desk tidy because I like it. I'm happy. I go home happy. An person with OCD would go home thinking, but maybe I didn't quite get it right, and they'd have to go back again, whereas, a reasonably well, in themselves autistic person will just be thinking, no, this is the way I like it. And when it's like that, I'm happy, and I'm clear on my routine, when I'm clear on how things are on my desk or whatever part of my life. I like to plan my holidays, in some detail, that kind of thing,
Yeah, I mean, there can be some sense of frustration, actually, as an autistic person, speaking about myself here.
Mm-hmm.
I know that I do like a sense of completeness, closing the gestalt or getting to the end of something, and sometimes when that's interrupted or there's a barrier to that, then feelings of frustration can rise up, or you can feel driven to continue. But that's quite different to the kind of compulsion drive kind of feeling that in obsessive compulsiveness, isn't it?
Absolutely. No, it's a very good point, because I agree with it. I know that experience myself, and I do talk to autistic clients about it. First of all, it's not anxiety driven. It's not primarily fear, but it is about frustration. Frustration, I think, is exactly the right word. And also, by and large, there's a completeness to the cycle rather than a vicious cycle to it. In other words, if we manage, not all the time, because life's not that neat, but quite often, if we can get the completeness, we actually will be satisfied.
And be at rest. Yeah,
we can be at rest, at least temporarily.
Yes.
Yeah,
it's not temporary. That's going to rise up again straight away, like getting reassurance as an OCD person would be.
That is also a really good example of the contrast, because I in my mind earlier, one of the classic examples of the OCD vicious cycle and the way in which it simply can't be satisfied is reassurance seeking. A lot of OCD people would seek reassurance. It's okay, isn't it? This terrible thing won't happen now that I've taken precautions, And often people are tempted to say, no, that's just in your head. That's just that isn't real. You'll be fine, But actually, that's actually feeding the OCD. The OCD laps up the reassurance and gets stronger. Whereas in fact, what's needed is kind of just, well, I don't know. Life's uncertain, so you'll have to figure that out for yourself, and I'll support you with it, but I'm not going to reassure you.
It's difficult, isn't it? Because as a therapist, it's like, what do you do here? Because if you don't respond, that you're sort of being cruel because you're leaving them in it. Whereas if you do respond, you are keeping the whole defense going. Clients can sometimes say, that when they've had they've consulted a chain of experts, if you like, before coming, and then, or they might sort of have a really good therapy session. Have you ever had this happen to you? And then right at the end, as they're getting up to go, they'll actually undo it by saying, but you do think though that's and they'll undo wanting to seek, everything you've said is now not helped at all, because they just want this reassurance. They just want you to say, I know it's awful, isn't it?
I know, and it's common. No, I've had that experience loads of times, and it's common, and it's just part of the picture, and we have to learn to go with it and try and help it, but also expect it. That is the reality.
Because there's something about as well as not having trust in self, isn't there? Getting that security from somewhere, so seeking it outwardly. And I know autistic people do that. I know I do. I still sort of have a consultant, if you like. I have a friend, and I'll just run things by her and say, this and this happened. Did I sound like so-and-so, or did I respond wrong, or what is happening there? And I'm like this age and a psychotherapist that understands relational dynamics, but I still ask someone.
The difference from OCD there is it works. As in,
Yes,
you consult, you
right.
get some, if you want to call it reassurance, or just thoughts or feedback or whatever, and it works. You see, we know it's not OCD when it works.
Key.
It's okay. Now I feel clear. And by the way, I've got recently developed a particular way of seeing that kind of thing. Consulting somebody, or doing a lot of preparation in your head for an event, or even a lot of mental rehearsal or whatever. And I think, of course, we can overdo any of those things, and we might need sometimes to just, stand on our own 2 feet. But I think for neurodivergent adults, particularly at this point in history, I actually think we do need to do a lot of that, and it can be very helpful. And you don't need to feel ashamed of it, I think. And we don't need therapists to always tell us we shouldn't be doing it, which is the more standard way of seeing it. Because what I think it's like is nobody would bat an eyelid at that if you were in a foreign country. If you were in Germany and you said to your German friend, am I doing this right? Or how should I behave in this social situation? Nobody would bat an eyelid. But we are permanently in a foreign country. Autistic people, neurodivergent people are permanently in a foreign culture. In our own country, we're in a foreign culture. Right, so I think we need that stuff. Now maybe the day will come when we don't, but I think we do need some of that stuff. We need to consult, to check, I think I'm on the right track here, am I? And so I'm actually a fan of that.
I am. If I'm doing it not for anxiety reasons, because I have to get it right and I can't be myself and I'm always wrong. It's not that. It's if I care about people and I feel as if we're trying to sort something out between us, and maybe I'm not just getting a complete picture in some way, and I'm just getting a consultation with someone else to help inform me to make my own mind up more about it.
Yeah, and for things to just work better rather than less well. And in a way, it's like, we would like, the non-autistic, non-ADHD population to maybe pick up a bit of the slack around trying to cross the gap of the double empathy problem. But in the meantime, we're going to do our bit. So in a way, for me, that's you doing your bit to try and cross the double empathy gap. And why wouldn't you do that, So I think that's actually a really interesting thing. And then maybe that's, again, there's a theme in that I might even come back to separately, what you're talking about.
I love that, what you said, though, that's the key, isn't it? It's that it works.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
It's that it works. Yeah, they're getting the consultation, getting the other opinion or the viewpoint, or being able to talk it through, or getting to the end of something. It works. You're then at rest, you're at peace. It's like you're satisfied now.
My therapy philosophy in general is, if it helps, it helps. People say, should I do this, or will I go to this therapist, or will I try this technique, or will I do? I say, well, if it helps, it helps, and that's all there is to it in a way,
And I think with both sets of people as clients, either way, we don't want to sort of barge in and take control anyway. You do that with autistic people and with obsessive people who are coming in about obsessive compulsive experiences, because the control being a thing and dominating and taking over, and so at least there's those things. You can't go wrong if you don't do that.
Exactly. No, I couldn't agree more. That's a core point, and autonomy is a core theme in all of this, I think.
Credit clients for being able to think and to collaborate and work it out together. And
minority groups in general tend to get less of that historically, and therefore it's a sort of a history and a wound that the neurodivergent community are carrying as well. So they're minority groups, a sense of not having felt full partners in the therapeutic and treatment processes,
And you feel the pull, don't you? Like with, like we said before about, people actually outwardly asking for reassurance in an anxiety-provoked way, that you sort of know it's a bit of a trick, but you feel the pull, and sometimes you get caught out. You answer it, and then you think, I realise what that just was about. And I didn't see it coming. I didn't notice it at the time. It happened so fast. And then afterwards you think, I know what's happening there, and I'm not helping the client. I'm not doing good here. You know, you get pulled in, it gets co-created, doesn't it?
Totally.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, yeah, there's lots there now. So
the time.
we better pause. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, loads there, and always bits there that we could say more about. So we might come back to some of the themes again. But there's a lot.
Mm-hmm.
A lot in that territory. Yeah.
There is. Yeah. Thanks for today then.
Yeah, thank you. It was really interesting. As always, yeah, love the discussion.